Okay, great. Welcome everyone. So this is the beginner introduction for the Bitcoin meetup. So what is Bitcoin? You probably want to know about that. Maybe you're also interested in crypto in general. So what I will do in this talk is I will focus on Bitcoin because it's the first technology that is like this, the first crypto coin. And you can extend most of the things I say about Bitcoin to the other technologies as well. There is other differences, and I can answer questions about that later on. But for now, let's just focus on Bitcoin so that you have a sense of how that works. And the rest will become clear later on. So Bitcoin is, what is Bitcoin is actually a really interesting question. You can say that if you put it really simply, it's the most advanced form of money that has ever existed. A friend of mine, he calls it like, yeah, you know, if you want to explain Bitcoin, it's just very simple. You say it's magical space money from the future. And everybody's like, wow, I want that, right? Very simple. So you start with assuming that ordinary money, as we have known it so far, is actually not that sophisticated. It is a very sophisticated invention in terms of economics and finance, and we will trace a little bit of the history of that for about half an hour, and then you will see that the standards of money as we currently use it now is actually very low compared to what's possible, because we live in the age of the internet. Everything moves at the speed of light across the globe. And we're still using these weird little pieces of paper if we want to pay for coffee. It doesn't actually make any sense. So why is that? Why does money innovation move so slowly? That will become more clear. So Bitcoin was invented 9 years ago. And you could say that it was about the third or the fourth attempt at creating money like this. It was not an easy journey. It didn't fall out of the sky. It was not one of those inventions that sort of automatically happens and then they put on a patent on it. And you know, for example, the way aspartame was invented, this sweet stuff they put in Coke Light. They were trying to make super glue, and suddenly they, in one of the experiments to create super glue, they had this chemical, and then, oh, well, that's nice, it tastes sweet, but it's not sugar. So it was like this invention that came out of nowhere by accident. Well, Bitcoin is absolutely not like that. It's based on the wish for a group of people. They were called the cypherpunks, and they were very much into cryptography and economics. And they have tried for a very long time to create a money system that is separate from the ordinary financial world. And so it was a deliberate political act. And so then how did this develop? The story of that culminated into the invention of this new kind of money 9 years ago. Let's go back a little bit to the Second World War. In the Second World War, there were two types of technologies that were rapidly developed because of the war. We are talking about cryptography, and cryptography is essentially the sending and receiving of a secret message. So if I send a message and I want, Alice is sending a secret message to Bob, and no one is supposed to know what is in it. Like, for example, it's the coordinate of a submarine, or when are they going to attack on D-Day. You don't want to have that information intercepted and decrypted, right? So this technology became more advanced during the Second World War to be able to have an effective army. And at the same time, because of that, they also improved computer technology. And computers became massively better. And then you later had other innovations during the 70s. They invented this concept called public-private key cryptography, networked computing called the internet. So these two fields of cryptography and computer science, they developed hand in hand. And every time it got to the next level, there were new ways for people to say, like, I want my privacy, I want my freedom of speech, I want the freedom to transact. because they had an ideology that viewed the activities of a centralized government as not much compatible with their own sense of freedom. So they were anarchist, libertarian type of people. I don't know if you're familiar with the political stance of anarchism or libertarianism, but it basically doesn't recognize the authority of the government as being the ultimate determinant of what you do with your time or money. And those people, they were very strange at the time, especially because most people don't really view their economic transactions or their speech as problematic. Like they say, like, I'm not trying to hide anything. It's okay if the government spies on me. You know, it's okay if they can see every time I use my credit card what that is. But these people, the cypherpunks, as they call themselves, they were very much obsessed with creating a money system that has these features of privacy and freedom, as they viewed it. So there were 2 or 3 attempts at creating electronic cash, and 2 of them, like 3 attempts in total, and 2 of them were based on these principles of freedom and anarchy. And they failed. One of them was e-gold. That was, for example, the idea that if you put gold in a vault and you say, like, okay, everybody can register on this website and we keep track of who owns how much gold in our vault. And then you can trade that ownership on the internet with other people, and then you have electronic cash that is backed by gold. And that idea failed because it was very easy for the government to shut it down. The first thing that happened was that a lot of criminals started to abuse this system. And then, of course, what is a criminal? That's also a question that the government typically claims to know the answer to, whether you might agree with that or not. Long story short, the criminals started abusing it, drug dealers, and then, for example, and then the government said, well, you know, we're going to just shut you down because we don't want the thing to exist because of the drug dealers. They didn't say the other part, like, we don't want this to exist because if you can create your own kind of money, then we lose our, like, half of our political power over the population. So they shut it down. And the reason they could shut it down was that there was one single point of failure. They had that vault and they had that website and there was a company, and the ownership was decentralized, but not this hub of keeping track of all the transactions. And this is a thing that happens if the people come together and they create a new form of cash. It has to either be very local and small, so it's not very threatening and it's very easy to manage. They're doing that in the UK right now. In the United States, there's also a few places where they have this local cash that is circulating. It's very effective, actually, to boost the local economy. But when you have something that aspires to a global financial system, then, of course, governments will shut that down because they have, by law, the right to be the only ones who do that. And they delegated some of that power to the banks. And they don't want any private individual, private company without a banking license to set up a system like this. So the reason they could shut it down was when it was centralized. When it's in one spot, you can just walk in with a SWAT team and say, well, this story is over now. And that is why this group of people, the cypherpunks, they started to work on the next generation of this kind of money, and they want it to be decentralized in the same way that the internet is decentralized. You cannot shut down the internet, right? You have all these different servers and nodes and computers and connections, and if someone drops a bomb on New York, then, you know, the rest of the internet doesn't really stop working. So in the same way, you can also create, theoretically, a ledger that keeps a record of all the transactions that happen between people, between addresses, in the case of Bitcoin. And that ledger of transactions, that record of transactions, gets distributed throughout the network. So if part of the network gets shut down, there will always be a copy of all the transactions that have ever been done somewhere else. So that will make it very resilient to shutting it down. You cannot shut it down. It's a completely separate financial system. And that is what they did with Bitcoin. So the technical issues they had to overcome with this, they were significant. It took a very long time to put all the pieces right, to have a distributed system that could not be messed with, in the sense that if you try to cheat, that you would get caught. Like, for example, if you imagine that money is like this digital thing, right? It says this record says over here that I have this much money, and I will send it to Alice or Bob, and then it goes there, and then I say, well, I can also send it to Carol, right? And then why not? Because it's digital. I can make unlimited copies of it, right? That's the fun thing about the internet. And so this is called the double spend problem, and solving that problem was very important to making sure that this electronic cash system works. You need to absolutely be sure that if I spend money this person, I cannot spend it again. And they solved that. You could frame this as a mathematical problem. It's called the Byzantine generals problem. And there was a paper released. The paper that described the Bitcoin network is basically claiming, say, look, I have solved this problem, and we can build a network that creates a distributed consensus. And the algorithm we use for that is called a proof of work algorithm, where everybody who is verifying all the transactions on the network actually has to spend quite a bit of electricity beforehand to find the signature of the transactions that they want to put on the block. And this incentivizes them to not cheat, because if they create a block and they spend electricity on a block of transactions that is actually fraudulent, then the other nodes in the network, they will automatically reject that. They will see that there's a fraudulent transaction in it, or if it doesn't comply with any of the other rules of the network as it is defined in the software, then they will reject that, and that person will lose their investment. So they have no reason to try to cheat. So everybody's interests are aligned. And that is the magic that makes Bitcoin work. So they started building this in 2009. The first transaction was recorded early 2009. And after that, it grew very slowly, because at first it was just this very curious sort of a toy for anarchists and for programmers to play with, and like, oh, we have internet money now, but I don't care because I cannot use it. I cannot actually go to a coffee shop or go to an internet website and say, like, look, we have some Bitcoin here. How many Bitcoins can I give you if you give me if you send that TV to my house? You know, there was no price for Bitcoin really. It was just play money essentially at first. And the only people that were seriously involved with it, they were the ones that either were technically interested in this very elegant technical solution, or they had political motivations. They say, maybe this money can be the thing. Finally, money independent of the existing financial system. So either technical or political motivations. For quite a while, so there was no price for Bitcoin. And then at some point there was the first official transaction that took place. There was a British guy who, maybe I have the details wrong, but there was a British guy, and he ordered a bunch of pizzas, like 2 pizzas for an American guy. And he just called, across the Atlantic and said, look, please deliver 2 pizzas to my friend's house. And that guy transferred 10,000 Bitcoins to the British guy. So that was the first Bitcoin transaction, and the price was apparently 5,000 Bitcoins for 1 pizza. That was the official going rate for Bitcoin at the time. Very soon afterward, there was the first exchange that opened. So an exchange is just like with stocks and bonds. It's just a marketplace where you can trade, where you can say, like, okay, I have these many euros, how many Bitcoins can I buy for that? And then you have a market. And at first it was just a few cents, and then it was $1, and it was big news for people. Say, like, look, we have now magic internet money from the future, and it is just as valuable as $1, So people became excited. And after that, you probably know the story a little bit from the news. It went up a lot, it went down a lot. It's very volatile because no one knows how much it should be worth, right? It's just a big story about money. And how do you interpret the news about it? Is it good news, bad news? And that determines the price. And it has had roughly 5 big waves in which it was like sort of stable for a while. Suddenly it takes off and it becomes very expensive relative to the earlier price. And then it drops again like 80% or so. And then it has these waves. Sometimes for a couple of years nothing happens. So it's just like boring for people. They buy and sell a little bit, but there's nothing changing. So, and now it's obviously $10,000 about that. A month ago or two, like 6 weeks ago, it was $20,000. So you see that there's a lot of people that believe that these Bitcoins are going to be extremely valuable and are very useful. So that is the basic story of how this thing started. There's a whole bunch of technical details to take care of. Like, for example, we can expand a little bit more energy on how is this system built under the hood. I'm not sure if you guys want to hear more about that. I can go into that. We can talk more about the politics of why was this invented. There is also the specifics of Bitcoin. Like, for example, there will be 21 million Bitcoins created, and why was that made that way, and how does this develop? There's things to explore about how to use it. Like, some people say, like, okay, that's nice, but how can I get involved? Where should I buy it? How do I keep them safe? So those topics we can cover more now, and I would like that to be driven by questions. So please, if you still feel like, okay, how does this and that work? Like, you can ask now, and then I will just answer that, and then slowly over the next hour or so we will just cover everything that you would like to know.